I built a $99 million tech empire, but my brother called me a useless dropout. The next day changed everything. Success never truly silences the voices from your past, it only makes them louder when they come from people you love. I stood before a crowd of investors, cameras flashing, as our Series D funding round pushed my company valuation past $99 million. Everyone was clapping. Everyone but him. My brother. My name is Noor Khan. I'm 34, the founder and CEO of VividCore, a software platform that now powers over 4,000 small businesses across the globe. But more than anything, I'm a woman who was once told by nearly everyone, including family, that I would amount to nothing. I believed them once, until I didn't. The phone call came just hours after the press release went live. I was still riding the adrenaline when my brother, Bilal, called and said, "Funny how the world celebrates a dropout. You're still the same useless sister, just with better PR." My fingers froze midair. Was this his idea of a joke? I laughed awkwardly, waiting for him to say just kidding. But he didn't. I heard him sipping something, probably tea, while I stood there in my glass-walled office, stunned. He didn't even ask how I was doing. He just hung up after telling me not to let the money inflate my already fragile ego. My jaw clenched, but something deeper snapped. I could have brushed it off, but the weight of his words pierced through years of healing I thought I had done. That night, I stared at my bedroom ceiling, remembering all the times Bilal had said I wouldn't make it. My mind whispered, maybe he's right again. But then came a memory I had buried. I was 17, hands trembling as I walked out of our house with a duffel bag and a laptop I'd built myself. My parents weren't home, but Bilal was. "Go ahead," he said without looking up from his phone. "Let's see how long this dropout act lasts. You'll be back in a month." I didn't go back for 5 years. In those 5 years, I slept in hostels, took side gigs designing websites, and learned to code in libraries where the heat barely worked. Every cent I made went into launching VividCore. There were nights I wanted to give up, especially when my laptop crashed and I couldn't afford a new one. But I remembered Bilal's smirk and I kept going. Eventually, I built a beta version of the software. I offered it free to a handful of small businesses. They loved it. Word spread like wildfire. One baker from Chicago called it the first thing that made tech feel human again. That was the moment I knew I was onto something, and that I couldn't afford to fail. My first major investor came from a cold email. I sent it at 3 a.m. and didn't sleep, praying someone would respond. At 8:22 a.m., I got a reply, "Let's talk." That $100,000 check changed everything. It gave me breathing room, but more than that, it gave me a sliver of validation I had been starving for. Still, even with my company now scaling and my name floating around startup circles, Bilal never once acknowledged my efforts. At family dinners, he'd talk over me, joke about people who think tech is changing the world, while smirking in my direction. No one ever called him out, not even our parents. I used to wonder if they agreed to SO when I finally made it, $99 million. Valuation, Forbes feature, global clients. I thought just maybe he'd see me differently. That maybe, just maybe, he'd say, "I'm proud of you." But instead, he reduced a decade of sweat and sacrifice to a petty insult. Something about that broke me in a way success never could heal. The next day, I was supposed to celebrate with my team, but I canceled. I stayed home, scrolling through old messages from my early days. One stood out. It was from a woman named Elena, who had once emailed me, saying VividCore helped her save her failing floral shop. I remember replying with a discount code and a handwritten thank you note. That afternoon, I pulled up Elena's business. It had expanded to 3 new cities. Her homepage had a banner, "Powered by VividCore." I stared at the screen, then slowly smiled. That's when I made a decision. If Bilal couldn't see me, maybe it was time I stopped trying to be seen by people who only look down. Still, something inside me wanted closure. Or maybe confrontation. So I called Bilal. He answered with a flat, "Yeah, I built this from scratch," I said. "You know that, right?" Silence. "I know you think I'm just a dropout with a fancy website, but you're not." He cut me off. "I never said you didn't build it. I just don't get why everyone treats you like a hero." I blinked. "Because I beat the odds?" He sighed. "You left. You didn't see how hard things got here. You always think you're the only one who struggled." And suddenly, I saw it. He wasn't bitter because I succeeded. He was bitter because I left him behind. I softened. "I never meant to abandon you, Bilal. I had to choose myself. I thought if I proved something, maybe you'd be proud." His voice cracked slightly. "You were always Dad's favorite. Then you dropped out. They blamed me for not stopping you." That truth hit me harder than any insult. Beneath his coldness had always been his own pain. I had been so focused on rising, I never realized what I left behind in the ashes. We didn't solve everything in that phone call. But for the first time, we didn't speak as enemies. We spoke as two hurt people who needed each other more than we admitted. It wasn't a reconciliation. Not yet. But it was the beginning. A week later, I invited Bilal to my office. Not to flaunt success, but to show him where I came from. He walked through the glass doors, stunned at the open space, the coffee bar, the faces greeting me with joy. All of this, you did? He asked, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard. I nodded. I built it because I had to. But also because I wanted to prove to myself I wasn't useless. He looked around again, then finally met my eyes. I was wrong. I didn't know you had this in you. I smiled. Neither did I, until I had no choice. That day, I gave Bilal a tour. I showed him the first code lines I wrote, the failed features, the client emails. He asked questions, really listened. And when he left, he hugged me. Not stiffly, not awkwardly, just a brother saying, I see you now. Since then, we've rebuilt slowly. He still makes his jabs, but there's warmth under them now. And every time I sit in my office, staring at the nameplate on my desk, I think of that girl with the duffel bag and the fire in her chest. She didn't wait to be accepted, she built her own table, and now, when someone calls me a dropout, I smile, because yes, I dropped out of college. But I never dropped out of my own story. The following month, something unexpected happened. Bilal sent me a link to an article about a small-town tech initiative trying to teach coding to underprivileged youth. I didn't understand why he sent it at first, but then he messaged, think you can help them out? Looks like your kind of thing. I stared at the message for minutes. Bilal, the same brother who once called my laptop your stupid toy, was suggesting I bring my skills to others. I replied, let's partner on it. You have the community connections. I'll build the tech curriculum. His reply? Just a thumbs up emoji. But somehow, it meant more than a full paragraph ever could. Together, we launched a pilot program. It started small, 10 kids, one dusty schoolroom, and a few donated Chromebooks. But the energy in that room was electric. These kids reminded me of myself at 17, raw, underestimated, and brimming with untapped brilliance. I saw my past reflected in their hungry eyes. Bilal showed up every week. He talked to the kids, handled the parents, organized transportation. I handled the curriculum, the software, the mentorship. We were finally building something together, not because we had to, but because we chose to. One evening after class, we were locking up when Bilal said, I used to be jealous, you know. You had guts I never did. You left, and even though I hated it, part of me admired it. I turned toward him, surprised. He continued, you didn't just prove me wrong. You proved me right, that you were always meant to lead. I just didn't know how to follow. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. Not from sadness, but release. This man who once belittled me was now standing beside me, not as a critic, but as a brother who was finally healing, just like I was. Word spread about our program. Within 6 months, we were invited to speak at a regional education summit. Bilal stood on stage beside me, introducing our work to an audience of policymakers and business leaders. When he said, my sister is the bravest person I know, I saw his eyes glisten. And in that moment, I wasn't CEO nor Khan. I was just his little sister, and he was proud. But my story doesn't end with a family reunion or a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The truth is, even after success, there are days I still hear echoes of the old doubts. The voice that says, you're not enough. The whisper that asks, will they still respect you if you fail again? That's the thing no one tells you about building an empire. It's not the money, the scale, or the applause that gives you peace. It's facing the people who once made you question your worth, and choosing not to need their permission anymore. And now, when I look around my office, I don't just see glass and steel. I see resilience etched into every surface. The coffee machine my intern broke and tried to fix with duct tape. The whiteboard that still has scribbles from our first brainstorm session. The framed quote above my desk that reads, she believed she could, so she did. I keep a photo of 17-year-old me in the top drawer of my desk. She's standing in front of the bus station, holding that duffel bag and looking terrified. But behind her fear is something fiercer, hope. Every time I doubt myself, I open that drawer and remember who started this journey. And yes, I also keep a framed text from Bilal. It reads, turns out useless dropouts can build empires. Proud of you. I printed it out the day he sent it, a month after our pilot program launched its third cohort. To anyone out there feeling like the black sheep, the disappointment, the dropout, hear this from someone who's lived it. Your value is not defined by who believes in you, It's defined by how fiercely you believe in yourself when no one else does. I didn't build Vivid Core just to make money. I built it to make space for people like me who had something to prove, not to the world, but to themselves. And I built it for the next girl with a backpack full of dreams, walking away from a home that never saw her for who she really was, because the day after my brother called me the useless dropout, I didn't fall apart. I rose. I called him back, and instead of fighting, I listened. And in that choice, everything changed. We don't get to choose how our story begins, but we damn well get to choose how it ends. And this story? It's still being written, one line of code, one act of courage, one bridge of forgiveness at a time. A year later, I was invited to deliver a keynote speech at an international tech summit in Singapore. It was surreal, walking onto that grand stage, lights blinding, rows upon rows of people waiting to hear my story. I wore a deep blue blazer, my mother's gold earrings, and a quiet kind of confidence that had taken a decade to earn. I opened with a photo. That same picture of me at 17, tired, scared, but determined. And I said, this is who started Vivid Core. Not a woman with millions. A girl with nothing but a second-hand laptop and the desperation to be more than the box she was born into. People leaned in. The silence was electric. I told them about Bilal, about the years of silence between us, the insults, and the unexpected partnership that came out of pain. I watched as people's faces changed. Some smiled. Some teared up. Because they weren't just listening to a CEO talk about funding rounds, they were watching a sister reclaim her voice. After the speech, a young woman came up to me backstage. She looked no older than 20. My brother calls me a failure. She said, I'm studying computer science and working 3 jobs. Sometimes I think about quitting. But hearing you, it felt like maybe I'm not crazy for dreaming. I hugged her tight and said, you're not crazy. You're just early. That moment stayed with me long after the summit ended. I thought of all the women who walk through a world that doubts them before they even speak. The women who are expected to shrink, who are praised for silence and punished for ambition. I was one of them, but now, I had a responsibility. With Vivid Core thriving and our educational programs growing faster than I ever imagined, I launched a new initiative, Code Her, a free platform teaching coding and entrepreneurship to women in developing countries. Within 6 months, we had 8,000 active users in Pakistan, Kenya, Bangladesh, and the Philippines. Bilal became one of our biggest advocates. He started speaking at events, sometimes introducing me with tears in his eyes. Once, after a workshop, I heard him telling someone, if my sister can turn pain into purpose, anyone can. She taught me that there's no way to rewrite the past, but there's always a way to make peace with it. One evening, I visited our childhood home. It hadn't changed much, same cracked driveway, same crooked mailbox. But when I stepped inside, I felt different. I wasn't that insecure teenager anymore, begging to be seen. I was a woman who had built herself from the ground up, and brought others with her. In my old bedroom, the peeling posters still hung by faded tape. But the corner where I used to hide my scribbled business ideas in a shoebox was now illuminated by late afternoon sun. I sat on the bed and closed my eyes. And for the first time, I felt safe. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I wasn't proving anything to Bilal, my parents, or the world. I had become the person I always needed, confident, kind, unshakable, and that's the legacy I want to leave. Not just a billion-dollar company, not just an app or a name on Forbes, but a generation of girls who know that being underestimated is not a life sentence. It's a spark. And if they let it, it can ignite everything. The epilogue today, Vivid Core is valued at over $250 million. We serve 11,000 plus businesses and support dozens of community-led coding programs across 5 continents. But if you ask me what I'm most proud of, I'll tell you it's this. Every Tuesday, I co-teach a virtual class to a group of Afghan girls learning Python through our Code Her initiative. Their faces light up when we debug code together. Their laughter fills my soul more than any headline ever could. And once a year, I sit down with Bilal for coffee on the anniversary of my company's founding. We don't always talk about the past. Sometimes we just sit in silence, sipping, knowing how far we've come. But every now and then, he looks up and says, I'm really glad you didn't listen to me. To which I always reply with a smile. So am I. This is my story, not of revenge, but of redemption. Not of proving them wrong, but proving myself right. If you're reading this, wondering if it's worth continuing, if it's worth believing in yourself when no one else does, it is, and I promise you, the next day, the one after they tell you you're useless, that day might just change everything. A few months after launching Code Her, I received a handwritten letter from a 12-year-old girl in Multan. Her name was Ariba. In her letter, she wrote, I thought computers were only for boys. Then I saw a video of you speaking in Lahore. Now, I want to be the next you. I cried reading those words, because somewhere, once upon a time, I had been a Reba, afraid to dream, afraid to be laughed at, afraid to take up space. I wrote her back the next day. Not an email, a real letter. You don't need to be the next me, I wrote. You are the first you. And that will always be more powerful. I sent her a laptop from our foundation and an invitation to attend a one-on-one mentorship session. A month later, we met on Zoom. She showed me the first game she ever coded, a simple maze puzzle. She was shy, but her eyes glowed with the same fire I once carried through those lonely nights on hostel floors. This was the empire I wanted to build, not just a tech platform, not just a valuation, but a new story for girls like Ariba, who would grow up knowing they were not alone. In one of our weekly team meetings, I asked everyone to share why they joined VividCore. The answers broke me in the best way. One said, because I saw a woman leading and it gave me permission to want the same. Another said, because you didn't just build tech, you built belief. But it was my lead engineer, Amal, who said something I'll never forget. You turned your wound into a blueprint. I let that sit in the air. Because it was true, the very hurt I once thought would destroy me became the foundation of everything I would go on to create. That pain, those scars, that rejection, they didn't stop me. They shaped me, they made me dangerous in a world that profits from women's silence. And now, I am anything but silent. I speak on stages. I write for global publications. I sit in rooms with venture capitalists who used to ignore me and now ask for my advice. But I still keep the same mug on my desk. It's chipped and faded and says, "Do it scared." Because courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about showing up anyway. And Bilal? He's now one of the co-directors of our nonprofit. He's a different man. Softer. Wiser. One evening after a long workshop, he handed me a worn-out folder. Inside were old sketches, my first app wireframes from high school. I gasped. You kept these? He nodded, a bit embarrassed. I always knew you'd do something big. I just didn't know how to say it. That night, we sat outside on the porch, listening to crickets and sipping tea. There was no need for apologies anymore. Only understanding. And that, I've learned, is far more healing than any "I'm sorry" could ever be. Today, when I'm asked what it's like to be a woman in tech, I don't answer with statistics, I answer with stories. I tell them about the girl with a duffel bag who chose herself. I tell them about the brother who came back around. I tell them about classrooms full of girls rewriting their future. And I tell them, without flinching, that being underestimated was the greatest gift I ever received. Because when they doubt you, when they mock you, when they walk away, that's when the real story begins. That it's not the applause that makes the journey worth it. It's the quiet, relentless belief in yourself when no one else is watching. That's where the magic lives. That's where empires begin. And if you're standing on the edge of your own beginning, thinking about quitting, don't take the first step, take it trembling, take it anyway, because the next day could change everything just like it did for me. 2 years later, CodeHer crossed 100,000 active learners. We hosted a global summit, bringing together our top-performing girls from around the world. The theme was Write Your Own Story. I stood at the back of the hall during the opening ceremony, watching Ariba, now 14, step up to the mic with her signature lavender hijab and a smile that could melt stone. She shared her first public speech. When I first wrote a line of code, I thought I was just learning to make a game. But I was learning to rebuild myself. I don't think there was a dry eye in the room. The same girl who once sent me a letter in shaky Urdu handwriting now stood before 700 people, radiating purpose. I saw her mother in the audience, crying silently, mouthing, "Thank you." And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing something anymore. I felt whole. After the event, I walked outside into the cool evening air, barefoot for a moment just to feel the earth beneath me. Bilal joined me, holding 2 cups of chai. He handed me one and said, "You didn't just build a tech empire, nor you built a movement." I looked at him and whispered, "I think I finally understand what success really means." He raised an eyebrow. "Not the money?" I smiled. "No. It's when your success stops being about you and starts lifting others." He nodded. "Then you've been successful for a long time. The world's just catching up." We sat in silence, watching the stars blink in the sky above us. In that moment, I knew something deep in my bones. Healing and ambition can coexist. You can rise and still reach back. You can break generational patterns without breaking your family. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months, legacy isn't what you build with your hands. It's what lives on in hearts you never touch directly. I was once a dropout. Now, I'm a doorway. And I will never close again. A letter to the girl who was me. If you're reading this, sitting alone in a small room with your dreams bigger than your circumstances. If you've been told you're not smart enough, not obedient enough, not enough of anything, if you've been mocked for your ambition or silenced by someone you love, then this is your sign. Keep going. They might laugh now, but the same people who laugh will one day quote you, work for you, or quietly whisper your name with reverence. Don't wait for them to believe in you. Build anyway, love anyway, lead anyway. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be relentless. I made it out. Not because I had all the answers, but because I refused to stop asking the questions no one wanted me to ask, and now, I build bridges. I carry girls across the same fire I once walked alone. You can, too. You already know the path, you just need to take that one terrifying step, and then another, and maybe, just maybe, one day, you'll turn around and realize you weren't walking alone after all. You were leading. So, yes, I built a $99 million tech empire. But that was never the real victory. The real victory was becoming the woman I needed when I was 17. And that next day, the one after they told me I was useless, that day didn't just change everything. It started everything. 3 months after our global summit, I returned to my old university, the very place I dropped out from at 19. But this time, I wasn't there as a student. I was the guest of honor. They had invited me to speak at their annual innovation symposium and, to my disbelief, offered me an honorary doctorate in technology and social impact. I stood backstage in an auditorium where I once failed a math exam and cried in the bathroom. Now, I was being called Dr. Noor Khan. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer under my breath. When I stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. Somewhere in the back, I saw my parents. My father stood tall but kept wiping his eyes. My mother clutched her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Bilal sat between them. I began my speech simply. I am the same girl who once walked out of these halls feeling like a failure. And today, I want to thank failure for being my greatest mentor. I told them everything. Not just the victories, but the nights I went to sleep hungry. The rejection letters. The self-doubt. The times I begged the universe to give me a sign. The times I was the only woman in the room and had to speak louder just to be heard at all. And then I told them this: success is not walking across a stage. It's walking through fire and still choosing to love yourself when you get to the other side. Afterward, a professor who once failed me approached, eyes watery. You made me reconsider how I teach. You made me remember why I started. That moment meant more than any award. Because true change isn't just building something new. It's changing what already exists from the inside. Later that night, we gathered for a small dinner. My parents, for the first time, asked questions about my work, not out of politeness, but curiosity. My mother said, "When you left, we were scared. We didn't know how to protect you anymore." I gently replied, "You didn't need to. I was never meant to be protected. I was meant to grow." Bilal raised his glass and said, "To Noor, the one who didn't just prove us wrong, but taught us what it means to be right." We laughed. We cried. We forgave in silence. We healed in the spaces between the words. 6 months later, I stood at the construction site of our new innovation hub in Karachi, the Noor Center. It would house classrooms, co-working spaces, mentorship lounges, and a childcare area for young mothers pursuing tech careers. The walls weren't up yet, but the foundation was strong, just like mine had been, cracked, imperfect, but unbreakable. The workers poured cement. I pressed something into the cornerstone, a small brass plate engraved with my favorite words: "Do it scared. Do it anyway." I stepped back, hands dusty, heart full. A group of little girls from the neighborhood peeked through the fence, giggling. One shouted, "Are you the builder lady?" I knelt and said, "Yes. But one day, you will be too." They beamed, and in that single moment, I realized, empires don't rise from money. They rise from belief. From defiance. From choosing to create when the world tells you you're not allowed. Final reflection: looking back, I don't just remember the pain. I remember the clarity it brought. The discipline. The fire. The wild, unapologetic hunger to live on my own terms. I was never useless, so I was never just a dropout. I was never too loud, too different, too much, so I was always exactly enough. I just had to grow into the woman who believed it. So, if someone you love calls you a failure, bless them. Let their disbelief be your fuel, because one day, you will rise so high, they'll need to look up to find you, and that next day, the one after they tried to bury you, that's the day you bloom. 1 year later, the Noor Center was fully built. A 3-story building of white stone and glass, with vines creeping along the outer walls and a large rooftop terrace where children played while their mothers studied. The doors never closed. The rooms echoed with laughter, with clicking keyboards, with dreams being born in real time. One of our oldest graduates, Miriam, a 42-year-old single mother, stood by the reception desk, now an instructor herself. She caught my eye one afternoon and said, "Noor, this place doesn't feel like a building. It feels like an answer." I smiled, holding her words in my heart, because that's what I had been searching for all my life, not just success, but answers. Who was I really? Could I become more than what I was told? Could healing and leadership coexist? Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes. Every hallway in that building whispered stories of redemption. Every classroom was a rebellion against silence. And every line of code written by those women and girls echoed louder than any insult I'd ever received. Then something unexpected happened. A documentary crew from Europe reached out. They wanted to feature my story in a global series about innovators breaking barriers. I hesitated. I had shared so much of myself over the years, was there anything left to say? But then I thought of Ariba, of Miriam, of the next girl staring out her window at night, wondering if anyone out there had ever felt what she was feeling. So I said yes. They followed me for a month, filmed my early morning walks, sat in on code her classes, captured family dinners where Bilal now cracked dad jokes and my mother cooked her famous dal for the team. But the most important scene they captured was one I hadn't planned. We visited the old bus station, the one I had left from with nothing but a laptop and fear. I walked those same steps, stood under the same flickering lamp, closed my eyes, and remembered, the version of me that had left here was fragile, hopeful, and utterly alone. The version of me standing there now? She was unshakable. The crew asked me, "What would you say to her now, if you could?" I turned to the camera, smiled gently, and said, "You won't believe this, but you were never lost. Every no, every heartbreak, every lonely night, it's all going to lead you here. You will build things that change lives. You will walk into rooms they said you'd never belong in. And one day, the very people who doubted you will stand in line to learn from you. So don't stop. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. That's when you're closest to becoming who you're meant to be." 6 months later, at the film premiere, the documentary premiered at a theater in Amsterdam. I sat beside Bilal, watching my younger self flash across the screen. The audience rose in standing ovation by the end. Some were crying. Others were just smiling with the kind of awe that feels sacred. Bilal leaned in and said, "You turned a curse into a calling." I held his hand. "We both did. You showed up when it mattered." He nodded. "I almost missed the best parts of your life, Noor. Thank you for letting me catch up." That night, I didn't celebrate with champagne or press interviews. I sat alone on the balcony of my hotel, barefoot, watching the stars again. And this time, I didn't feel like I was chasing them. I felt like one of them. 5 years later, a letter left in my daughter's backpack. By then, I had a daughter of my own. Her name was Alina, and she was the boldest 7-year-old I'd ever met. One day, after school, I found a note tucked in her backpack. Scrawled in crooked handwriting were the words, "Mama, our teacher said women couldn't make computers." I told her, my mama made an empire, and now she teaches everyone, even boys. She told me to sit down, but I didn't. I said it louder. I wept when I read that, because Alina didn't just inherit my name or my eyes, she inherited my fire, and that was the real reward, not the money, not the empire, not the headlines, but raising a daughter who would never have to question whether she was enough, because she had grown up inside the world I had fought to create. Final words: if you've walked this journey with me, from brokenness to brilliance, from rejection to rising, thank you. I don't know your name. I don't know your story, but I believe in you, because I was you, and if you take nothing else from this story, take this. They called me a useless dropout, but I built a future, I built a legacy, I built a world that didn't exist, so others would never again have to ask for permission to belong. And the day after they told me I was nothing, that was the day I became everything. 10 years later, full circle, I was standing in front of a mirror, adjusting a white shawl over my shoulders, when my daughter, now 17, entered the room. She was wearing a deep maroon kurta, the same color I had worn the day I pitched my first investor. "Are you nervous?" she asked. I turned to her. "A little, but it's a good kind of nervous." She smiled. "You've done this 100 times. I touched her cheek gently. "But not here." Because that day, I was giving the convocation speech, at the very same high school that once called my parents in to suggest I be redirected to a simpler career path. Back then, they didn't see potential, they saw problems. But now I was walking in as an honored alumna. We entered the main hall, my eyes landed on the school's new tech lab, the Noor Khan Innovation Studio. I paused. My daughter whispered, "You really built everything you once dreamed about." I didn't reply right away. I just looked at her and thought, no, I build more than I dared to dream, the principal introduced me with a reverence I never expected. The students clapped. I walked to the stage, this time not trembling like the girl I once was, but rooted, graceful. Still that I began with the words that had followed me all my life. They once called me a useless dropout. And then I paused, let the silence hang, and said, but I decided they don't get to finish my story. I do. The auditorium went quiet. Then, like rain, the applause came. I didn't talk about success in numbers that day. I talked about how I had to build my confidence brick by brick. How the world may never hand you a stage, but you can build your own. And when I looked into the sea of young girls, eyes wide, pens still against notebooks, I knew my story had already done its job. They didn't need to become me, they were already becoming them, and that was more than enough. Later that evening, one more letter when we returned home, I found a box on my doorstep. No name. Just a small note, from someone who finally understands what it means to believe in a woman before the world tells you to. Inside, I found a framed page. My very first rejection email, crumpled, yellowed with time. Beneath it, in bold gold lettering, was the inscription, the fire that started it all. I smiled. I knew who sent it. Bilal thought he had taken something meant to break me and turned it into art. A full circle, sealed not with words, but with understanding. I placed it in my home office, above my desk, where I now worked on my next project, a memoir. Called The Next Day changed everything, because people still asked me, what was the turning point? When did it all shift? And I always told them the same thing, it wasn't a moment. It was a choice, the choice to rise after being dismissed, the choice to speak when silence was easier, the choice to believe that the life I imagined was waiting for me on the other side of fear. Final scene, a classroom in the mountain sits. Early morning. The sun is spilling into a classroom perched high in the Swat Valley. Inside, 10 young girls sit in a circle with laptops donated by Codehurt. I stand quietly at the back, watching a local woman, once a graduate of our training program, now teaching Python in Pashto. One girl, not more than 10, leans over to her friend and whispers, one day, I'll be like Noor Khan. The teacher gently corrects her, smiling. No, you'll be even greater. Noor Khan opened the door. But you will build the whole world. And in that moment, I knew, I was no longer just Noor, the founder, or the speaker, or the sister, or even the empire builder. I was the spark, and they were the wildfire. So here's the truth I leave you with asterisk. I built a $99 million tech empire, but what I really built was freedom, not just for me. For every woman who thought she was too small to change the world, turns out, she wasn't too small, she was just the beginning point. 15 years after that phone call sometimes, when it's quiet, I sit in my garden at sunrise with a cup of chai, laptop closed, phone on silent, just breathing. The empire hums in the background now, capable, self-sustaining, filled with brilliant women I once mentored who now run circles around me. There's something beautiful about becoming obsolete to your own creation. It means you've passed on the fire. I remember a time when I was afraid of becoming irrelevant, when my identity was so tied to proving myself that I didn't know who I'd be once the proving stopped. But the proving did stop, and something gentler took its place. Now, I write. I mentor. I sit in conversations that don't revolve around profit margins, but around legacy. We talk about redefining education, ethics in AI, accessibility in rural spaces. We talk about technology as a servant, not a master. And I smile, because this is what I always wanted, not to dominate the world, but to serve it with meaning. One email that stopped me cold not long ago, I received an email with the subject line, you don't know me, but you changed my life. It was from a woman in Nigeria. Her name was Folake. She had found an old interview of mine on YouTube, subtitled in Hausa, and began watching it every night. She was 19, living in a village where girls were expected to marry at 16. She told me she hid her cousin's smartphone under her pillow, just to watch the same 6-minute clip over and over. I didn't understand all your words, she wrote, but I understood your eyes. You looked like me. You looked like someone who had been told to be quiet, and chose not to. Folake now teaches coding to 42 girls in a makeshift classroom made of tarp and bamboo. She ended her message with this, I didn't just find a role model. I found permission. That line stayed with me for days, because I realized something I hadn't understood before. All along, I thought I was building a tech company, but I was actually building permission to speak.to, rise.to, fight.to, forgive.to, begin again, and that has become my most valuable product. The next chapter. I am now working on a new initiative, LegacyNet. It's a platform designed not to teach, but to preserve. It collects the stories of women in tech, in villages, in kitchens, in classrooms, anywhere. Innovation happens without applause. We don't focus on their companies. We focus on their beginnings, because I've learned that the world is changed not just by the billion-dollar exits, but by the woman who teaches one girl how to code using a whiteboard and a broken marker, and I want those stories to outlive us. I want my daughter's daughter to scroll through that archive and feel as rooted in her brilliance as any boy born into it. That we are not just writing history anymore, that we're archiving courage. And if there's one thing I want etched into the future, it's this: she came from nothing, they called her a dropout, but she made millions believe. One last walk with Bilo's older now. We both are. We meet every Thursday for a morning walk around a small park near his home. His beard has grayed. His steps are slower. But our conversations are deeper than ever. I still remember the day I called you useless, he said one morning, quietly. I stopped walking and turned to him. You don't have to carry that anymore, I said. You've built as much as I have. You rebuilt us. That matters more than what you once said. He smiled, a little relieved. I never thought you'd forgive me. I didn't, I teased. But I outgrew the need to be angry. We laughed. Then he said something that felt like the final piece of a long puzzle. You're not a dropout, nor. You just dropped out of the life they tried to force you into. And thank God you did. We kept walking. And the sun kept rising, closing my eyes, opening the future. I once thought success meant standing on the highest stage. Now I know it means standing anywhere, and using your voice without shaking it. I once thought forgiveness meant weakness. Now I know it is the fiercest kind of strength. I once thought I was alone. Now I know I was always surrounded by sisters I hadn't met yet. That we are not rare anymore. We are rising, and we are enough. So here's the final truth. I built a $99 million tech empire, but what I built next, the healing, the bridges, the fire that refuses to go out, that was priceless. And the day after they called me useless, that was the day the world started listening, and I haven't stopped speaking since. 20 years later, a quiet room filled with echoes. I turned 60 this year. Strange how fast it all moved, how the noise of ambition softened into the whisper of wisdom. My body moves slower, but my thoughts have never been sharper. I don't attend board meetings anymore. I don't rush across time zones. I don't even own a smartwatch. Instead, I have an herb garden. And a journal I still write in with a fountain pen. Today, I sat in the back row of the Global Women's Technology Forum in Geneva. My name wasn't on the program. I didn't want it to be. I came only to watch. The keynote speaker was a tall, confident young woman in her 30s. She wore her hair in a bun and spoke like she had fire in her bones. Her name was Ariba. Yes, that Ariba. She spoke about equitable innovation, digital inclusion in war zones, and the ethics of AI in underserved populations. Her presentation was sleek. Her conviction was stunning. But her voice, that voice had grown bolder, more commanding, more fearless than even mine ever was. At one point, she paused mid-sentence and looked out into the crowd. I wouldn't be standing here if a woman named Noor Khan hadn't told me at age 12 that my voice mattered. Everyone turned. She pointed directly at me in the crowd. She didn't just change my life. She gave me permission to change others. I couldn't hold back the tears. Because in that moment, I understood something sacred. Legacy is not the work that survives you. It's the work that continues through someone else's heartbeat. And Ariba was carrying mine forward. A letter I never sent years ago. I wrote a letter to my younger self. I never mailed it. But I think it's time to share it now, because someone out there might be living that same chapter one once did. Dear Noor, you're 17. You're exhausted. You're scared. You just left a house where no one clapped when you spoke. And right now, you're wondering if that means your words aren't worth hearing. You'll sleep on floors. You'll eat instant noodles for months. You'll cry more than you laugh at first. But one day, your name will be written in places your feet never stepped, and the same brother who broke you will one day build beside you, and the girls who now hide their dreams will one day chant your name on rooftops. Don't give up, not because the world needs another tech founder, but because you need to meet the woman you're going to become, and she's magnificent. With love, Noor, the version of you who finally came home to herself. The museum room. Not long ago, I visited a museum exhibit in Islamabad called Voices That Built. One room was devoted entirely to women in tech. On one wall was a timeline of key innovators from the region. I didn't know my name would be there. IT was printed in simple black font on white plaster. No flashy photos. Just a quote. She didn't just write code. She rewrote what was possible. I stood there for a long time. Not because I was proud, but because I was grateful. Grateful I didn't wait to be ready. Grateful I wasn't defined by those who couldn't see me. Grateful for the chaos, the defiance, the mistakes, because they made room for the revolution. I was meant to lead. A final memory before sunset. Some nights, my daughter brings over her own kids, my granddaughters. They run through my house barefoot, arms sticky with mango pulp and mischief. They don't ask for permission to speak. They ask questions that challenge the universe. They build robots out of cereal boxes. They write code like it's poetry, and sometimes, one of them asks, Nano, is it true you dropped out of college? I smile. Yes. Then how did you become so famous? And I lean in, brushing hair from their eyes, because I stopped waiting for someone to tell me I was worthy that I just decided I was. They don't always understand what I mean, but one day, they will. The final truth: I was called many things: useless, dropout, too much, too loud, too stubborn, and they were right about all of it, but they didn't realize. Those were the very things that would save me. Those were the very things that would change the world. So, to you, wherever you are, in a corner dorm room, in a corporate cubicle you hate, in a small town where no one sees you, you are not a mistake, you are not a misfit, you are the beginning, and that next day, the one after they say you'll never make it, asterisk, that day could change everything, and mine did. And now? It's your turn. Not 25 years later, the archive of her name, the world has changed so much. AI now runs most low-level code bases. Girls in villages use virtual reality classrooms to learn design and programming. Tech is woven into everything: agriculture, health, art, even poetry. And somewhere in the center of it all is the ripple of my voice, still moving through spaces I've never seen. The NorCon Innovation Fund, which I once started with a $10,000 seed donation from a small angel investor, now awards scholarships to over 8,000 girls a year. But I don't run it anymore. Damn, my daughter does. Alina, she wears my old blazer sometimes when she speaks. The deep blue one from the Singapore summit. I keep telling her to buy her own, but she says, no, mama. It smells like the beginning. I used to wonder if she'd feel pressured by my shadow, but she didn't live in it. She stood in it long enough to know how to use her own light, and that, I think, is my greatest work. A visit to the university I never graduated from last fall. The university where I once dropped out invited me to speak again. But not just to students. To faculty, the same professors who once thought I was too distracted, too impulsive, too unpredictable, now sat at round tables, notebooks open, hanging on my every word. I didn't come to lecture. I came to ask questions. What do you do with a girl who learns differently? What would you change today to keep someone like me from walking away? And to their credit, they listened. One older professor, white-haired and gentle, said, we didn't have the language to understand you then. Now we do. And it's shaped everything. That day, the university announced a new scholarship, the NorCon Resilience Award. It's not for the perfect students. It's for the ones on the edge, the misfits, the risk takers, the ones bold enough to bet on themselves, the ones who just need one person to say, I see you. At my mother's grave she passed peacefully. We buried her under the shade of a neem tree near our family home. She was quiet in life, and even quieter in death. But in her final years, she softened. She began calling me Beta again. She kept newspaper clippings of my interviews in a shoebox under her bed. And once, while holding Alina's hand, she whispered to me, you did it. You saved all of us. I visit her grave often. I sit under that tree and read the Quran softly, and sometimes I talk to her aloud. I hope you see it now, Amy. All of it. The world I was trying to build. The wind moves the leaves like they're nodding yes to a global celebration in silence. On the 25th anniversary of Vivid Core, the team planned a massive celebration. Invitations, media coverage, international guests. But I asked for something different. I asked for one day of silenced no marketing. No speeches. No selfies. Just impact. I told the team, let today be about the lives changed, not the names remembered. So, on that day, across 64 countries, girls sat in free coding boot camps, hospitals ran AI triage software built by our graduates, women in refugee camps taught each other entrepreneurship using code. Her modules translated into 5 dialects, and I sat in my garden, watching the sky, knowing I had done what I came here to do. I made myself unnecessary, because true leadership is building something so strong, it thrives without you. Final reflections, a life beyond the frame. My face is no longer in magazines. And that's okay. Awards have faded. Accolades have yellowed. But I am everywhere in the stories of those who dared, because I once did. And now, I live softly. I plant trees I'll never sit beneath. I fund schools anonymously. I teach storytelling to girls who don't want to be CEOs, but want to be heard. And every night, before bed, I still write. Not for the world. For me, sometimes, for the girl I used to be other times, for the woman I became always, for the ones still on their way at TOU. Reader, from nor you've walked a long road with me. You've watched me rise, fall, forgive, rebuild, and now I pass the torch. You are not too late, you are not too lost, you are not too broken, you are simply in the middle of your becoming. So, when they call you names meant to shrink you, smile, then grow louder, because the day after they label you useless, that day might just become the beginning of everything IT did for me, and it can, for you. 30 years later, the last keynote I was 80 when they asked me to deliver the Keynote at the World Women's Forum in Kyoto. I almost said no, not because I was tired, though I was, but because I no longer felt the need to explain myself to the world. I had long since passed the baton. Others had taken my place, and rightly so, but then I received a letter. It was from a girl in Yemen who had smuggled a USB drive with my documentary into her school, watched it in secret, and started a robotics club with donated circuit boards. Her words were shaky, typed in half English, half Arabic. But her last line was crystal clear: please speak. Some of us are still listening with our lives. So I said yes. The walk to the stage, my knees hurt more than they used to. My hands trembled slightly as I stepped up the curved stairs. But when I reached the podium and looked out over a sea of thousands, young, old, veiled, tattooed, fierce, soft, I felt the same fire in my chest I'd carried since the day I left home with a laptop and a duffel bag. I spoke slowly, clearly, deliberately, not to convince, but to remember. They once called me a dropout. They called me emotional, difficult, impossible, and they were right. I was impossible for the world they tried to trap me in, but I wasn't born to fit. I was born to open minds, open gates, open futures. By the time I finished, the applause felt like thunder beneath my feet, but the real moment happened later. One young woman, no older than Alina had once been, waited for me in the hallway. Tears in her eyes, she whispered, "You were my mother's Noor. Now you are mine." And with that, I knew that I hadn't just lived a life, I had lived across generations. The final chapter, a room of my own. I now live in a quiet house on the edge of Hunza, overlooking the mountains. I designed it myself, wooden beams, open glass, shelves full of books and handwritten letters from every corner of the world. I spend my mornings watching the sunrise paint gold across the valley. I spend my afternoons listening to music from when I was young. I keep a drawer full of memories: the rejection letter, the first laptop, Ariba's game code, Alina's first drawing of me speaking on stage, Bilal's last Father's Day card before he passed. It said, "Thank you for making our family brave." Sometimes, journalists still try to visit. I tell them the same thing: there's nothing left to see. Look out the window. That's my legacy. Because it's true. It's in the classrooms of Uganda, where solar-powered Coder tablets light up eager hands. It's in the community centers of Karachi, where single mothers teach app development to girls who once thought computers were only for boys. It's in the boardrooms of companies founded by women I once mentored, women who now mentor others without even realizing they've become leaders. It's not in me anymore. It's in the world. A whisper to the future: I know one day my name will fade, maybe sooner than I imagine. That's okay, because I didn't build this life to be remembered. I built it so that other women wouldn't have to beg to be seen. If the only thing they ever say about me is, "She kept going when they told her to stop," that will be enough, because they once called me useless, and now, even the silence I leave behind will teach them otherwise. Final days, and first light. The winters in Hunza are slow and deep. Snow drapes the valley like a lullaby. Children laugh somewhere beyond the trees. My joints ache in the morning now, but I move gently, with gratitude. Each breath is earned. I've stopped attending conferences. I've stopped taking interviews. But I still write, a little every day, in my leather-bound journal with frayed edges and ink stains. Some entries are one sentence long: "The clouds rested today. A girl from Lahore built a coding school in her grandmother's house." Alina laughed like she was 5 again. She still calls me her compass. These are the lines I care to keep. Not headlines. Not achievements. Just pieces of living. I no longer feel like I'm racing time now, I'm simply walking beside it. A visit from Alina yesterday. Alina came with her daughters, my granddaughters, now both teenagers. One of them, Zara, asked me, "Nano, what does it feel like to be finished?" I smiled. Finished with what? With everything. Changing the world. Doing big things. I reached for her hand and placed it on my heart. This doesn't finish. It just changes shape. You don't end a legacy, you simply become the soil others plant in. She didn't say anything for a while, but later, I saw her sitting under the apple tree in the back, scribbling in her notebook. Maybe she was writing her beginning, or maybe she was writing mine, in a language I'll never know. And that, I think, is the most beautiful truth of all. We don't get to choose how we're remembered, we only get to choose what we give. The letter I leave behind in the drawer beside my bed, there is an envelope marked, "For whoever comes after." Inside, there is no will, no instructions, no final quote to be engraved in marble, just one handwritten letter. To the girl who finds this, you do not need permission to rise, you do not need to wait for someone to believe in you, the fire is already in you. You are allowed to burn through limits, you are allowed to be soft and steel at once. The world may not understand you at first, but that's okay. Build anyway, speak anyway, love anyway, because someday, another girl will find your work, and realize she's not alone, and in that moment, you will live again. Nor the last morning. I don't know which morning will be my last, but I've already decided how I'll greet it, with open windows, fresh air, and a quiet thank you to the sky. I'll wear white, I'll sit by the window wrapped in a shawl my mother gave me long ago, and I will close my eyes not with fear, but with full presence, knowing that every broken thing in me once made a bridge. For someone else, my name may fade from pages, my story may someday shrink to whispers, but the ripples? They never stop, they travel, they teach, they become oceans, and someone, somewhere, will rise, not knowing I existed, but carrying something I once lit in the dark. That is enough, that is everything. The bench by the river. I have a favorite spot down by the river, a worn wooden bench with peeling blue paint and carvings of initials I'll never be able to trace. Some days I sit there for hours. No phone, no journal. Just me and the sound of water moving, never fast, never loud, but always forward. That's what life feels like now. That a river that taught me how to stop pushing and just float. Yesterday, a young woman I didn't know found me there. She held a tattered copy of a memoir I never officially published, one that had somehow been printed and passed around like a secret treasure. She sat beside me without asking. I thought you were a myth, she said, breathless. I chuckled. I thought I was too, sometimes. She was quiet for a long time, then asked, did it ever get easier? I thought carefully before answering. No, but I got stronger, softer too. And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking for ease and started asking for meaning. She nodded like she understood. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. Some stories are told best in silence. That a dream I had last night. I dreamed of my younger self. She was barefoot on a train platform, holding that laptop to her chest like a lifeline. Her face was uncertain, her hands shaking. But her eyes, oh, those eyes, still held fire. I walked up to her slowly and whispered, you're going to be okay. She looked at me, older, weathered, soft at the edges, and asked, really? I smiled. Not always. But you'll become free. And then she hugged me so tightly, it woke me. I sat upright in bed, the early light barely peeking over the mountains, and I wept, not from sorrow, but from AWEAT how far I had come, AT how deeply I had lived, the AT how, even in dreams, I was still learning to hold myself. The final page. There will come a day when someone clears my shelves that they'll find the journals, the letters, the photos, the awards collecting dust. Maybe even a single dried rose I kept between the pages of a book called Women Who Run with the Wolves. I don't need them to know my whole story, just one truth. I was here. I burned quietly and brightly and stubbornly. I forgave loudly. I opened locked doors with my own hands. And when they told me I was too broken to build anything, I built something anyway. And maybe, if they are lost in their own story, they'll close their eyes and hear me whisper, begin. Even if your hands shake, even if your voice cracks, begin. And so, this is not an ending. This is the passing of the flame, the handoff to the next voice. You, reader, may not have built a tech empire. You may not have stood on stages or defied your family, but somewhere in your story, maybe in a quiet corner no one else sees, you are choosing to rise. That, too, is rebellion. That, too, is legacy. And when they ask one day, where did your fire come from? You don't need to say my name, just look to the sky, to the stars, to the words you now carry forward, and say, from someone who refused to be small. Echoes in the code. One evening, while sorting through old files on a vintage hard drive, I stumbled across a folder named Prototype 01. It was the very first app one ever built. The interface was laughably outdated, the UI clunky, and the font awkward. But it still opened. Still worked. The IT had been a simple idea back then, a tool to help underprivileged students find open source tutorials in their native languages. Nothing flashy. No monetization. Just a bridge for someone who didn't know where to start. I clicked through the interface, and a little pop-up blinked at me, your voice matters. I had written it as a default message when someone completed a module. I stared at those 3 words like they were gospel. So much of my life, the battles, the breakthroughs, the billion-dollar empire, had come down to this seed of belief, and I smiled, realizing the code still runs, the message still speaks. The girl who wrote it? She still lives here. Returning to the village last spring, I visited the tiny village where my grandparents once lived, a place with dusty roads, roaming goats, and quiet evenings where the call to prayer echoes like music. IT hadn't changed much. I sat under a tree that had grown taller than I remembered. Children gathered curiously. One of them held an old iPad covered in stickers. I asked what she was doing. I'm learning how to build a website, she said shyly. We have internet now. A teacher comes every Friday. When I asked her what she wanted to do when she grew up, she didn't hesitate. I want to be the woman who built the code that taught me. Asterisk I didn't tell her who I was, I didn't need to, because that's when you know your legacy is alive, when it speaks without your name attached, letters from strangers, and some not so strange I still receive letters. Real ones. Written on paper, in pencil, ink, sometimes even crayon, from women in Syria, Argentina, Sudan. From mothers who left abusive marriages and learned to freelance. From fathers who changed their minds about their daughters' futures after watching my interview. From girls who watched my TED Talk on cracked screens in refugee camps. But one letter stood out, asterisk it was from AMANIT, was from my father. Not long before he passed, he asked my daughter for my address, my real one, up in Hunza. His letter was short, careful, asterisk. Nor, I don't know how to say this in person. I never did. But I was wrong. Not just about you, but about what it means to be a parent. I thought protecting you meant controlling you. But you didn't need protection. You needed space. And now, the world has space because of you. I hope you can forgive an old man who didn't know how to raise a storm like you. Your Abbott. I cried for an hour after reading it, not because I needed his apology, but because I finally understood something I hadn't before. Some stories take decades to finish their sentences, and some love learns to speak late, but speaks still. The final gift. As I near the end of my life, I've arranged one last gift. Something simple. Each girl who graduates from a CodeHer program receives a letter in a sealed envelope, hand-signed by me. They all begin the same way. Dear daughter I've never met. They will tell you the world is already built. But they are wrong. It is being rebuilt every day, by hands like yours. Your voice can carve mountains. Your mind can open locked futures. Walk boldly. Fail graciously. And when it gets hard, because it will, remember, I made it. And so will you, because even when I am gone, I want every girl to feel as if I am still whispering beside her. You are not too small, you are not too late, you are the whole beginning. And now, with this final truth, I rest not in silence, but in the sound of millions rising.